How can you make sure that the correct information prints on your 1099 forms? Watch this lesson as we discuss what to look for in accounts payable and how to correct wrong information. When the lesson is over, you should be able to set up accounts payable to track reportable amounts by general ledger prefix. And you may need to do this if you have several payers in your company that are filing returns. You'll also be able to use reports to check whether you have all the required information on your vendors. And last of all, you'll be able to reconcile the reportable payment amounts and make corrections if they're needed.
Una, I'm getting ready to file my 1099s, but I want to make sure that the correct payment amount prints in the forms. Can you tell me where Accounts Payable stores the amount paid to a vendor for 1099 purposes?
If you have just one entity filing 1099s for all your vendors, Accounts Payable uses the amount from the vendor record on the form. The amount paid is automatically accumulated in the 1099 amount paid field as long as the invoice distributions are not marked 1099 exempt when you pay them.
Okay, that makes sense. But what if within my company I have different fiscal entities that pay the same vendor? Because each entity has its own tax ID number, each has to file their own returns. How does Accounts Payable split up the amount for each vendor by prefix?
You just have to remember to select this checkbox in AP Settings. Retain 1099 totals per GL prefix. With that option selected, in addition to tracking the amount on the vendor record, Accounts Payable accumulates the amount paid by vendor by entity. Later, when you file 1099s and specify for which prefix, it will pull the appropriate amount from the prefix total record for each vendor.
That's easier than I imagined. How does it handle intercompany accounting? What happens when one entity makes a purchase but another one pays for it? Which one records the 1099 amount paid?
In that case, it's accumulated to the prefix that purchased the goods or services, not to the one that paid.
Good. That's exactly how I want it to work. Now that I understand where the reportable amounts are stored, can you tell me the best method to review the information before I file my returns?
Sure. Why don't we use our sample database and I'll show you a few reports that you might find helpful. Now remember, before you file your returns, make sure you've entered, posted, and paid all the invoices for the filing year. Otherwise, the reportable amounts will be all wrong.
Got it.
Okay. First, we'll look at a report that lets you see at a glance which vendors will receive a 1099 form and what information you have on file for them. Go to Reports, Miscellaneous, 1099 Preparation.
Does that report come with my software?
Yes. This report only shows vendors that you've selected to receive a 1099 form. You can view it according to how you're going to file the returns. Since we're only interested in the vendor information at this point, select the option To Vendor. Now, let's preview this report. And this is what it looks like. Notice the vendors are sorted by 1099 form type. Review the vendor name, address, tax ID number, and tax ID name. All this will print in the recipient information boxes of the 1099 forms.
If the information is wrong or missing, can I change it on the vendor setup?
Yes.
I see. What if a vendor is supposed to receive a 1099 but isn't on my report?
Go to the vendor setup and find that vendor record, and then check the box Vendor receives a Form 1099.
Won't the 1099 amount paid be all wrong?
Nope. Accounts Payable tracks that amount even if that box is not checked. When the box is checked, it just means that the vendor will be included in the 1099 print run.
And if the vendor is listed underneath the wrong form type, can I change that on the vendor setup as well?
Yes. While on the vendor record, if the vendor has elected to receive an electronic copy of the 1099 instead of a paper copy, check the box for electronic 1099 and enter their email address. Take note that in order to send your vendors electronic 1099 returns, you must have written consent from the recipients on file. Sage has a blank form just for this purpose. You can download it from the Sage Knowledge Base. Use Article 87584. If you want to use a version of the 1099 preparation report that shows which vendors are to receive their 1099 electronically and their email address, use the report attached to Knowledge Base Article 87998. This is the amount that will print on the vendor's 1099 form. Review this report to see if the reportable amount for any vendor is over or understated. You may need to adjust the reportable amounts if any of the following occurred during the calendar year. You change the setting for how Accounts Payable stores 1099 totals, by vendor only, or by vendor and by GL prefix. You close the 1099 year at the wrong time and began to pay invoices. You change the setting to include or exclude miscellaneous deduction 1 with the 1099 totals. Sometimes miscellaneous deduction 1 is also known as workers' comp. You split paying a distribution by check and by credit card. If one of the mentioned items occurred during the calendar year, your 1099 totals may be wrong. Fortunately, the software has a tool that can fix this for you. It's called Recalculate 1099 Totals. This tool is located on the Accounts Payable Tools menu. If security is enabled in Sage 300 Construction and Real Estate, you will need to ask your application administrator to grant you permissions to access this task. Recalculate 1099 Totals recalculates the 1099 amounts for this year, last year, and next year on the vendor and prefix total records. The process reads through every posted invoice that's not been archived, using the payment records for those invoices to recalculate the 1099 amounts based on your accounts payable settings, and replaces the existing amounts with the recalculated amounts. Before you use Recalculate 1099 Totals, you need to determine a few settings. You should make sure that the 1099 year-ending date in Accounts Payable settings is correct. This can be the current 1099 reporting year or 1 year in the future, because the software lets you generate 1099s for the current 1099 year or the last 1099 year. You should also decide how you want Accounts Payable to store 1099 totals, and if miscellaneous deduction 1 or workers' comp should be included in the 1099 totals. We recommend that you make a backup of your data before the recalculation process, and ask other users to exit the Accounts Payable application. Please note that the recalculation process only includes payment records for posted invoices that have not been archived. If you used Move Payments to archive payments dated in the 1099 reporting year, do not use Recalculate 1099 Totals because it will not be able to add up the 1099 amounts correctly. Let's walk through recalculating the 1099 totals together. From Tools, select Recalculate 1099 Totals. You have the option to recalculate the totals for all the vendors or specific vendors. Use ranges to make your selection. If your accounts payable is set to store 1099 totals by GL prefix, the software will also calculate the prefix totals. Click Start to begin. The software displays a message that recaps the Recalculate 1099 Totals process. Click Yes to continue. When the process is done, review the journal that prints. The journal shows you the number of vendors and prefix total records that were processed. To review the reportable amounts, print the 1099 preparation report again.
Thank you, Una. Now I know how the 1099 amounts are tracked and which reports to use to check vendor and payment information before I file my 1099s. Plus, I learned how I can correct the amounts if they're wrong.
Well, it sounds like you have it all under control, Brent. Good luck.